My name is Joshua Marin, and my project is on the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Code is about human experience during World War II, and it involves 10 codes about the human experiments. The Nuremberg Code was presented at the Nuremberg trials. The Nazi doctors made a point that there was no legal law stating that what they were doing was legal or illegal, and this worried two doctors, Doctors Andrew Ivy and Leo Alexanders, the creators of the Nuremberg Code. The first six of the Nuremberg Code: first, voluntary consent of the human subject is essential. Second, the experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society, unprocurable by other means or methods of study, and not random and unnecessary in nature. Third, the experiment should be designed and based on the results of animal experiments and a knowledge of the natural history of the disease or other problem under study that the anticipated results will justify the performance of the experiment. Fourth, the experiment should be conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury. Fifth, the experiment should be conducted where there is a prior reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur, except perhaps in those experiments where the experimental physicians also serve as subjects. Sixth, the degree of risk to be taken should never exceed the determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the. These are the last four. Number 7. Proper preparation should be made and adequate facilities provided to protect the experimental subject against even remote possibility of injury, disability, and death. 8th, the experiment should be conducted by only scientifically qualified persons. The highest degree of skill and care should be required through all stages of the experiment of those who conduct or engage in the experiment. 9. During the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end if he has reached a physical or mental state where continuation of the experiment seems to him to be impossible. Number 10. During the course of the experiment, the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment at any stage if he has probable cause to believe in the exercise of the good faith, superior skill, and careful judgment required of him, that a continuation of the experiment is likely to result in injury, disability, or death to the experimental effects of the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Code is what medical research today is based on, their ethical principles. One of the most important documents for ethical medical research, and it has been used over 50 years, helped prosecute the Nazi doctors that did unquestionable research on human beings. These photos are what the Nazi doctors did on prisoners in concentration camps and of prisoners of war. Nazi experiments. Nazis would test high-altitude tests on prisoners. Nazi doctors would test diseases on people in concentration camps, and in each one it was different. An example are these two camps. Their prisoners were exposed to phosphagen and mustard gas in order to test possible antidotes. Nazi doctors did experiments to advance Nazi racial and ideology goals. Some of the tests the Nazis did were bone, muscle, and joint transplants, and sterilization of men and women as doctors tested them. The patients tested have severe mental and physiological problems. Doctors found a way to kill somebody by injecting them with fentanyl and cyanide. They also experimented with other poisons to see what they would do. They tested it in food, water, and other things. Ethics. The judges of the Nuremberg trial realized the importance of the Hippocratic ethics and the maximum primum non nocere. Put full effort in the well-beings of the subjects that in the 10 codes that they added at the Nuremberg trial, that they could withdraw from the trial at any time. Nazi experiments were forced on the human subjects and did not care for their safety, as the experiments were deadly to the subjects. Also, there was no consent ever given to the doctors by the subjects of the experiment. This photo right here is of a photo of the Nazi doctors at the Nuremberg trial. Ethics. Hippocratic Oath says that there is a relationship between the doctors and the patient and that the doctor would not hurt their patients, but in research it was different, as it did not have to follow this code because it never reached out to research. Doctors at the Nuremberg trial, Ivy and Alexander, tried to expand the oath to protect research patients as well. This is seen in the Nuremberg Code as patients can leave the experiment at any time, and also the scientists can stop the experiment anytime, and also there is the consent of the patient in order to even start the experiment. These are more photos of the Nuremberg trial as seen. Nuremberg Code and the Human Rights. The Nuremberg Code protects patients from any harm done by researchers and doctors. The doctors that did research on humans disregarded the principles of harm, principles of lawfulness, rights, and principles of justice. Violated the principles of harm. Principles of harm says, do not harm others. The Nazi doctors did harm to the patients in the experiments as an example, they cut off people's limbs and reattached it onto someone else. The experiments also disregarded the principles of justice. They acknowledge a person's right to due process, fair compensations for harm done, and fair distribution of benefits. The prisoners did not receive any compensations for the experiments did upon them, or to their families if they died. Experiments disregarded rights. The acknowledgement of a person's right to life, information, privacy, freedom of expression, and safety. The experiments compromised the patient's safety, rights to life, and information as they did not know what experiments were done to them at the time. Applied to today's world. Today, the Nuremberg Code is what researchers followed as they do not want to go down the same road the Germans did at the Nuremberg trial. Not everyone has entirely accepted or adopted the code, but many have accepted the code's words, like the consent of the patient has been universally accepted, and also the right the patient has to decline or accept the experiment. The code was the foundation of what researchers tried to be at the Nuremberg Code was one of the several that made today's research policies happen. Why we need the Nuremberg Code in the 21st century. The Nuremberg Code was created to help the patients of medical research and human rights, but it was not fully set in stone and not many people follow this. Today, we can see weaponized scientific research, and the Nuremberg Code is slowly pushed out the window by governments and some scientists, and nothing is being done by this by the scientific community. We have seen sarin gas and illegal drugs tested on prisoners in the past years, but there is nothing today to stop this. The Nuremberg Code, if we can expand on this to the 21st century, we can eliminate some of the problems some scientific research breach in the code today, and we'd be better off. Scientific community has not updated the code to fix today's versions of human rights violations the code's tried to fix, and if we do not put the Nuremberg Code first, we will be like the Nazis before us. This is the works cited on my research that I did for this project.